Hello everyone, this is Archana this side. If you all have logged in, please comment that you are in so we can start with the session. Response that everybody is in. So today in this particular session, we will be having a brief idea of what organizational culture is, and going forward we will be discussing the parameters listed under organizational culture one by one. The main idea, the central part of this particular training program is to have a cross-cultural training teams or cross-cultural organizational teams working effectively in the organization. So today's session is an introductory session wherein I will be explaining you what organizational culture is. I'm sure you all have joined the organization very recently. So I will be briefing you of how culture operates in the organization setting, how important it is to follow a path that is of organizational culture, and how do we go ahead with developing the organization and ultimately developing the human resource of the organization. So we will start with organizational culture, the concept. If you have any queries, I will ask you, I will give you a time, then you can type in your questions so that I can give you answers. So we are good to start? Alright. So as per the definition, culture is a unique dominant pattern of shared beliefs, assumptions, values and norms that shape the socialization, symbols, language and practices of a group of people. So let us now cut this definition into several parts. Number one is culture is a unique dominant pattern. It is unique in nature because every organization has a different culture, has different cultural aspects attached to it, and of course it is dominant because it is definitely responsible for the success or failure of any organization. If the culture of the organization is very weak, the organization will not be able to survive in a longer period of time. Alright, so it is a unique as well as dominant pattern. Now dominant pattern of what? Number one, shared beliefs. Like I said, organization is based on a foundation of culture. So whatever the owners believe, if I am a owner of a company, so I believe in honesty, if I believe in transparency, giving autonomy to my employees, that becomes a dominant and unique pattern of my organization. Alright, next is it is based on certain assumptions. I have an assumption that every person I come in contact with is honest and will not cheat me. And based on this assumption, I prepare a cultural pattern of my organization. Values on which I believe and norms. Norms are nothing but your rules that shape the socialization, symbols, language and practices of a group of people. So norms are rules that shape the socialization. Socialization is coming together of people. Symbols is representative of the relationships in the organization. The language you speak and the practice. Practice is nothing but the management practices or accounting practices, organizational practices that people follow in a group. Second part is the attitudes and approaches that typify the way staff carry out their tasks. So attitude is definitely important when it comes to determining the culture of the organization, because the more positive, as we progress ahead, I will be explaining you that there is nothing called as positive attitude or a negative attitude. Your attitude has to be in line with the vision and mission of the organization. So if I have an attitude that helps me attain the goals and objectives, it is called as in a normal language is a positive attitude. And if I am going ahead or maybe I am going away from, just give me a second, I think there seems to be some disturbance here. Start. Right, so we were discussing about the attitudes and approaches that typify the way staff carry out their tasks. So attitudes, like I have already mentioned, that there is nothing called as positive or negative attitude. It is the attitude which is mandatory for achieving the vision and mission of the organization, and at the same time the approaches. the way we complete our tasks, the way we carry out the routine activities will definitely be based on the culture that we follow in the organization. For example, the culture of my organization is transparent, giving autonomy to its employees, then definitely my employees will have a better approach. They may seek help from their colleagues and believe in teamwork and will complete their tasks. So whenever we are talking about culture, belief, assumptions and values are no doubt important, but the attitudes and approaches with which people work is also equally important. The third point here is culture is developed and transmitted by people consciously and unconsciously to subsequent generations. This is the most important point, and you as freshers who have newly joined the organization should definitely remember this, because you will be passing on these cultural values to your seniors, to your juniors who will be joining the organization after you. So it is developed and transmitted by people. Like mentioned in the first point, it is based on beliefs, assumptions and values. So beliefs, assumptions and values are adopted by people, be consciously or unconsciously, and it is transmitted. Transmitted is shared, transferred to subsequent generations. Whoever comes after you, you will pass on the tradition. Like for example, if you experience that there is transparency, if you experience that there is a lot of freedom given to the people, you will definitely share this information with your juniors, right? So we complete the definition part over here. We move on to the next slide, which is we will be understand the parameters or maybe the factors that what must be for culture to exist. So why culture exists in the organization basically. So number one, it must be shared by the vast majority of members of a group or society. So the thing over here is, whatever culture you set for your organization, it has to be shared with large number of people, be it in your organizational group or be it in society, so that people will start understanding the cultural aspect of your organization. Second, it must be passed on from generation to generation. Like we just discussed, culture is not something that I learn and I forget. You have to learn, you have to practice and you have to transmit. You have to teach your younger generation to follow the same culture who are coming in your organization. And it must shape behavior and perceptions. Definitely this is a crucial point. As per the culture of the organization, your behavior changes. I'll give you an example. I was working with a company once when I was completing my MBA. I was working with a company which believed in openness. All the information, though I was a trainee, all the information was shared equally with all the people in the team. So it helped me change my behavior, that I also started sharing the minutest of the detail with all my team. So it helped to shape my behavior. So we can say that the openness part of organizational culture helped to shape the behavior, as well as perception. Perception is the way in which we look at things, we look at people and form judgments about. So when you have a culture of, say, openness or trust, you start trusting people with more open ideas, with more open eyes and ears, and you embrace people from all the background. We are talking about cultural diversity here, so you embrace people from all cultures across India and outside India. Next is the cultural iceberg. So on your screens also you must be seeing the slide which talks about the iceberg. On the first half of the, like we call it as a tip of the iceberg, is the practices, language and symbols that are visible. The way I practice, if I have a practice of greeting everybody while coming to the office, or once I am in the office I greet everybody good morning, good afternoon, good evening, that's a practice. Language with which I speak should not be abusive, should be polite enough. And the symbols. Symbols is the way I perceive things. Symbols are the way I put an example in front of people. So these are observable elements which can be easily seen. What goes behind this is the norms. If the organization has a rule of greeting everybody, people practice that rule. If the organization values people, it will give more emphasis on people rather than task. And assumptions. So shared beliefs, norms, values and assumptions that we discussed in the first point of the definition of culture is what is the not observable part, which is below the iceberg, below the water. Shared assumption. Now let's see what shared assumptions are. So shared assumptions are the thoughts and feelings that members of a culture take for granted and believe it to be true. So assumptions is what my thoughts are or my feelings are according to the culture, for the culture, that I take for granted and I believe it to be true. Because based on these assumptions, the culture takes place. Values. Values are the basic beliefs people hold that specify general preferences and behaviors and define what is right and what is wrong. So based on assumptions are my values. When I believe something is true, I then give it a preference and define whether it is right or wrong. And this right or wrong is based on what I believe in values, what I perceive as values. Cultural values are reflected in a society's morals, customs and established practices. Like not harming animals is a cultural value, is a societal values. Whenever you watch any movie, there is a message that flashes. No animal was harmed or was killed during the shoot. That is nothing but the society's moral. That is a value that the particular production house believes in. Norms, on the other hand, are rules that govern behaviors of groups of people. Next is symbols. Symbol is any visible object, act or event that conveys meaning to others. For example, any artifacts, dress, office layout, slogans, ceremony. So whatever depicts your values is a symbol. Next is language. Language is a shared system of vocal sounds, written signs and or gestures used to convey meaning among members of a culture. If you must be able to see it on the screen that there is a symbol of Nike, which is a brand. So Nike's swoosh was inspired by the Greek goddess Nike, the winged goddess of victory. The swoosh symbolizes her flight. It conveys the meaning of a brand of sports shoes. So whatever symbol you use, it translates into some language. It depicts the culture of the organization, what the organization basically believes in. So whenever now you come across any logo, try and identify, try and understand the culture behind that particular logo. I'm sure you, with practice, you will be able to understand it. Right? So next is practices. So practices are observable cultural customs such as taboos, that are culturally forbidden behaviors, and ceremonies. So practices, as I have already discussed, as I have explained in the earlier slides, that practices are the ways in which you carry out your task, your everyday task. Next is socialization. Socialization is the process by which people learn values, norms, behaviors and social skills. It is the means by which new members are brought into a culture. Socialization is coming together. Like we are socializing right now. We are exchanging ideas, we are exchanging information. You will be sharing your views with respect to culture in your organization. So this is how new members are brought into a culture. So you do the same thing with your juniors when they would join the organization maybe 6 months or 1 year down the line. Next is the types of organizational culture. The basic types of organizational culture are bureaucratic, clan, market and entrepreneurial. Bureaucratic culture is nothing but it is the behavior of employees is governed by formal rules and standard operating procedures. Such a culture perpetuates stability. Organizations with bureaucratic culture tend to produce standardized goods and services, for example, government ministries and fast food establishments. Alright, so bureaucratic culture, bureaucracy as we all are aware of, they are governed by certain rules and SOPs. So there is no chance to deviate from the process, you have to follow the same process. Take for example McDonald's. McDonald's is a fast food chain. You go to any McDonald's center, the peri peri fries would taste the same because There are standard operating procedures that are followed. Or take for example Durga Coffee, I'm sure you must have heard of. It's a local brand in Pune. Now they are expanding in across Maharashtra and outside Maharashtra as well. So, or Starbucks coffee or CCD, their coffee stays the same, go anywhere. So that is nothing but SOPs wherein they have a bureaucratic culture. Next is clan culture. In a clan culture, the behavior of individuals are shaped by tradition, loyalty, personal commitment, extensive socialization and self-management. A clan culture is achieved unity through socialization. Long-term employees serve as mentors. Members are aware of the organization's history and have an understanding of the expected manner of conduct and organizational style. Members share feelings of pride in membership and peer pressure to adhere to important norms is strong. So clan culture is exactly opposite of bureaucratic culture. Clan culture is more towards the socialization wherein people come together, share their experiences of working in the organization. They are very well aware of what the organization is. The best example of clan culture is when the son of a family gets married and the bride comes to the family. The culture that is explained to her, the tradition that is passed on to her is clan culture. Okay, wherein members of the family are much aware of the history of the family, right? People tell them about the likes and dislikes of people when it comes to food. Some people take sugar in the tea, some people don't take sugar in the tea. So this is the best example when that came to my mind while explaining clan culture. So you have to have strong socialization when you want to imbibe the culture of clan in the organization. Next is market culture. In a market culture, the values and norms reflect the significance of achieving measurable and demanding goals, mainly concerning those that are financial and market based. Companies with a market culture tend to focus on sales growth, profitability, market share. In a market culture, the relationship between individuals and the organization is contractual, that is previously agreed. Individuals are responsible for their performance, whereas the organization promises specific rewards for levels of performance. Managers are not judged on their effectiveness as role models or mentors, but on monthly, quarterly and annual performance goal based on profit. So market culture is typically give and take. So if there is a sales growth, if there is profitability, if there is increasing market share, then the organization is supposed to have a market culture. So their values and norms are based on achieving financial and other market related trends. So relationship between individual and organization is always contractual, right? And their rewards are based on monthly target that they achieve, monthly, quarterly or annually. So market culture is typically where there is production and sales are happening in that particular organization. The strongest culture is market culture. Last is entrepreneurial culture. So wherein we will be focusing upon the Steve Jobs example of Apple. So organizations existing in the context of an entrepreneurial culture are characterized by high level of risk taking and creativity. There is a commitment to experimentation when it comes to entrepreneurial setup, because entrepreneurs are regarded to be risk takers in the organization. They conduct a lot of experimentation, innovation, etc., and they try to come up with their own culture in the organization. Now let us see what is the relationship between culture and organizational performance. Organizational culture has the potential to enhance organizational performance, individual satisfaction, sense of certainty about how problems are to be handled. Culture serves as a control mechanism to channel behavior towards desired behaviors and to prevent undesired behaviors. So that is the particular role that culture follows when it comes to increasing the performance of organization. And this increasing the performance of organization is not just in terms of money, but it is in terms of growth and development of organization as well as the stakeholders associated with the organization. Next is building a strong organizational culture. We will be discussing certain points under how do we go about building a strong culture in our organization. Number one, a common behavioral style must be shared by managers as well as employees. Number two, have the same basic approaches to solving problems, meeting goals and dealings with stakeholders. Number three, have shared common norms that guide rules governing rewards and punishment. Number four, a strong organizational culture assists in the creation of a stable organization, the consequence of which lead to the achievement of the company's strategic goals. Now we will see what are the steps that should be followed while building a strong organizational culture. Number one is careful selection of the vision and mission and the objective. Second step, once you select the vision, mission, objective, you challenging the early work assignments. Next, training to develop capabilities with culture. Reward must be linked to sustain the culture. Adoption of cultural value policies. Sixth is reinforce culture with ritual, stories and rites. And lastly, role model to sustain the culture in the long run. Now let us see what are the outcomes of socialization process. When the socialization becomes successful, number one, you get job satisfaction. Your employees have role clarity. They have high work performance. They have better understanding of the culture. They are committed to the organization and they internalize the values. When the socialization becomes unsuccessful, there is job dissatisfaction. There is role ambiguity and conflict. There's misunderstanding, tension and perceived lack of control. There is low job involvement, low performance and hence there is rejection of values. People don't internalize the values at all. Next is, I will be sharing a video now. Organizational culture and change. So this is a reinforcement video that you can watch. It's just 30 seconds. Right. So as you have seen the video, I'm sure you have understood how people were behaving before the culture was developed and after the culture was developed and implemented in the organization. So this is all for today, wherein we discussed, I tried to give you a brief idea of what organizational culture is. Going forward in the lectures coming in the next week or maybe in the next session, I will be explaining you how you can implement the particular cultural type in your organization. So depending upon the cultural diversity that you have, depending upon the vision and mission of your organization is, we will be go ahead in defining the culture of your organization. So that's all from my side. The session is now open to question and answers. Whatever questions you have, you can just type in so I can read the message and probably answer it for the benefit of everybody. Thank you. There is one question from Mr. Subhash. Okay. So Mr. Subhash asks me that what are the means for dealing with adverse or negative situations that are affecting a team. Okay. So Mr. Subhash, it's a very good question and let's discuss this question at length. So the best way to effectively deal with a negative situation that is basically affecting your team in which you are working necessarily should have a strong leader. Because as we discussed in the slides also, that vision, mission, shared beliefs, assumptions and values define the culture. So if there are any adverse situation, the strong leader will share the values which will help to come out of an adverse situation. So basically every team needs a leader. When you are talking about a team should have a leader and leader has to be strong. Strong by means culturally strong. Even in the most collaborative teams, there has to be someone to make the final decision and keep the peace. Alright, because if you leave it to the employees, they will probably not be able to reach at a conclusion which is all inclusive. So there has to be a leader which can probably make the final decision and keep the peace. Conflict resolution strategies can be very helpful, but there should be a procedure for following the conflict resolution. Alright, that has to be in place. So I'm sure this particular solution answers your question. Alright, so Mr. Manish asks me, transmission of organizational culture, how it happens throughout the organization culture. Okay, so organization culture is also shaped by people or forces that are outside the organization, that is by the consumers of the products or services that are being provided by the organization. So consider the theme parks created by organization. There are many, and you have to identify the forces that probably impact your organization. You have to take into consideration the stakeholders that are outside as well as inside the organization, and you have to decide the values of your organization that will probably satisfy the stakeholders inside and outside. And through experiences, through socialization, through meetings, through informal gatherings, you can pass on the culture of your organization to your customers, to the stakeholders that are outside the organization. I would love to answer your questions. So if you have any questions that come to your mind after the session, do write it down, and when we connect next time, I would be really happy to satisfy all the questions. Thank you so much. See you next time.